Thank you for joining us for True North Session 3. Back with John again. And one of the last things that we mentioned in the very end of the last session is we ended with a couple of questions. You said that God sets the design boundaries for successful civilization, and that these were the foundational principles on which the Fathers of Confederation based our Constitution. Can you just wrap that up a little bit, explain that a little further if you'd like?
That's why I quoted Francis Schaeffer last time. Yeah, he's a Christian historian, and he says, our civilization is unique. We're based on the Christian foundation. And you can't deny it. It's been 2,000 years since the foundation was laid. And the Christian principles have worked their way through the Western world, and we're the inheritors of it now. And so Canada is actually the end result of 2,000 years of Christianity learning how to apply the Ten Commandments and the Golden Rule. We're the lucky winners here, sort of, you know.
Exactly. And I know that you were saying that, you know, God obviously designed civilization to work, right? It's a cohesive unit of cooperation where I do good to you, you do good to me, and where governments punish evildoers and reward good. Now, taking that a next step further in this session, you've already suggested that the universe was designed by God. How can you be so sure that the universe is designed by God?
It's because the more science has looked at the universe, the more evidence of design they have seen. And never before in history have we had a society that was ready for the idea of design. I mean, everything in our lives is designed. You know, the car you drove in was designed. The cell phone that you used was designed, intricately designed. I found out the other day that the cell phone, the major processor has 171 million transistors in it. Wow. That didn't happen by accident. The internet was designed, and so never before in history have we begun to see how anything complicated that works has to be designed. It can't happen by accident.
Yes, I totally agree. I mean, we can see that in all of what man has produced, that it is an intricate, interwoven design that works as a whole or not at all. Can you give us some quick examples of what you call the boundaries of design that God has set in the physical universe?
Well, you know, when we talk about boundaries, when we talk about the laws of civilization, there's no such thing as absolute freedom, because absolute freedom would bring chaos. And so that's what God's laws are about. He sets the boundaries of the design, and basically what he's saying, don't go beyond these boundaries, because when you do, you'll have negative consequences. God doesn't want us to mess things up. And so the laws of, even the laws of nature have boundaries. When God made the universe, he made so that every element has its own boundaries, its design features. A hydrogen atom is different from an oxygen atom, and that's never changed. And those boundaries are so necessary for the entire universe to work out in the long run. For instance, God designed the hydrogen atom. When he designed it, he had to design it in such a way that it unites with the oxygen atom to produce what we call water. Water is one of the most essential parts of life. And we take water for granted, but without water, there's no way we could have life on Earth. And God had to design the hydrogen atom to combine with the oxygen atom long before he even began the universe, so that at the particular stage in history we'd have liquid water. Because you know why? Liquid water has to have certain characteristics. It's got to be able to flow through your veins. It's got to be able to evaporate from lakes. It's got to be able to form clouds. It's got to be able to freeze. Found this out the other day. Water, when it freezes, has a very unusual characteristics. Most things, when they freeze, they contract. And water contracts as it freezes and gets heavier, but at a certain point in the freezing, it turns around. It starts to expand. As a result, water doesn't sink to the bottom of a lake. I mean, the ice doesn't sink to the bottom of a lake. It floats on top. God had to plan that ahead of time. If water froze and fell to the bottom of the lake, all the lakes and the rivers and ponds in the world would have frozen by now. All life underwater would have died. God had to pre-plan that ahead of time. You can't create a universe and sort of let it create itself. And there's no such thing as last minute.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, otherwise it would have just, you can't set it and forget it, you know. It's, you know, I know that, for instance, like deism, or the deists, believe that God, they call him the blind watchmaker,
Right.
where he just kind of, made the universe and that he steps back and he has no active part in it whatsoever. Even if that was true, it's still, when you think about God's design, when you think about all of and water's just one example, right?
Sure.
Where those things had to be pre-planned
Absolutely.
to work together. And it goes beyond just cells, and it goes beyond water. Look at the ecosystem of this world. We all acknowledge that without honeybees, there wouldn't be hardly any pollination at all, which means no plant life. So what came first, the honeybees or the plants? Or maybe it evolved its need for honeybees to carry pollination. All of these things, if you remove one element, and we'll get into this in the next episode. The next episode, I wanted to talk about complexity. But if you remove one element from an integral system, it ceases to have function. And it's called irreducible complexity. But we'll get into that in the next session. I wanted to end this session by asking you what, and this is leading up into the next one, what is the far side of complexity? You and I have talked about this in our own personal talks, but you make a difference, and we'll segue this into the next session, where you say there's a difference between simplicity on this side of complexity versus on the other side of complexity. Can you explain that briefly?
Everybody's been looking for a unified theory of the universe. And it's the chalice at the end of the search or something. And they're looking for a simple explanation. And there really is a simple explanation, but you can't find it using only one perspective. Earlier, I think we mentioned the secularist. The secularist only sees what he can see with his eyes and, touch, feel. He's a materialist.
Yes.
And he takes all those things into account, and he's studied the universe, and he thinks he can come up with a unified field theory about the universe. Well, unfortunately, without consulting with the designer, you don't know why the universe was designed. What's it here for? Why did God design life? How did he do it? That is not revealed in science. You can't look in a telescope and discover God's motives.
Right.
So God had to write a book, and he wrote it, 3,500 years ago? And it's been passed down to us. When you take his perspective, then you're looking at the complexity of the physical universe, and you're looking at the complexity of God's design characteristics. You're combining the two of them. When you've looked at the complexity of the whole thing, then you can come up to some conclusions. You can say, I understand why we're here, why we came here, why there's a God. But we've got people saying, we understand the whole system, but there's no God. Well, they're not taking everything into perspective. Right. This side of complexity is like me saying, I understand about V8 engines. I worked on them when I was a kid. Well, you don't understand everything about a V8 engine. You've never worked on it. You've never studied it. You don't know how it works, etc. How can you say you understand everything? Now, give me a mechanic that's been working on that engine for 40 years. He might be able to say, I understand it. Well, the far side of complexity is when you've taken all the factors into account, the physical universe, the explanations of scientists, and also God's explanation. That's the far side of complexity. And then you can come to some really simple conclusions. And quite frankly, the conclusions that I come to when I study the Bible tells me God's got a plan for every single individual person. And it's a wonderful plan. And that there's no need for fear, there's no need for death. For goodness sake, there's no need for anxiety. If only we could get that across to people. I'm not saying it because I'm saying it, because I discovered it. God's word says what the reasons are. That's the far side of complexity. Right. And actually, I didn't get that quote from myself. I didn't even get it from a Christian. I got it from an atheist.
I think I remember you saying one time, though, that once scientists 1,000 years from now or something reach the end of the rope and we're able to do space travel,
right,
the light years beyond the solar system, once they've arrived essentially at the end of their arrival line, they'll find theologians that have been there for thousands of years and stuff. So that's very interesting. And even, because we're scientists, and science is about how and what and when. But it's very infrequently about why, right? And Richard Dawkins himself says the why questions are not important. I beg to differ, sir.
I totally agree. For the first 30 years of my life, all I knew was the secular perspective. and I knew what was going on in the universe. But I had no meaning for my life. I had no purpose. We lived on a farm, and on the other side of the fence there were cows, and they'd walk by and look at you, with their cow eyes, and I'd say I was jealous of the cows. You know why?
Simple life.
Well, they didn't worry. They didn't know.
Exactly.
They couldn't look at the reason for their own existence. And when you start looking for the reasons of your own existence, and if you don't have any answers, it's devastating. And that's why so many young people have reached the end. What's amazing to me, older folks, they've accepted all this. Young people, you get to be, 15 years old, whatever, you say, there's got to be a purpose to reality. What do you think the movie The Matrix was about? People need a purpose. And until you have that purpose, you're in what? You're lost.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to correct. You don't have to stay lost. There are real, substantial answers, and when you find them, you'll be delighted. You'll be amazed.
Absolutely. I think this is a good place to end this session. Covered a lot of good stuff on this one, so I appreciate you coming out for this one.
Okay.
And in the next session, like I said, we're going to be talking about complexity in the universe and on this planet, and looking forward to getting into the nitty-gritty about all of this discussion about design. So stick with us for session 4. Thank you very much.